Well, please welcome U.S. Representative Laurel Lee, one of 13 members from the U.S. House investigating the attempted assassination of President Trump on the task force. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
What surprised you the most in your visit to the site in Butler, Pennsylvania?
Seeing the site, one of the things that's very surprising is how small it is. This is a rural area, and to actually visit it, you get a sense of how close these buildings are to the stage where President Trump stood, and just how close, just the proximity that this attacker was able to get to President Trump. So the physical space was very surprising, and I think an important part for the task force members to get an understanding of what happened and the type of actions that local law enforcement and Secret Service were doing that day before this happened.
Representative Michael Waltz, one of your fellow Floridians and members of the task force, expressed some skepticism that the shooter, the killer, may have acted alone. Do you have any skepticism at this point?
Well, I think the important thing now is that we don't have conclusive evidence yet one way or the other. So we've started our process and have been busy gathering information about the people that were there that day, the types of things that law enforcement were doing to prepare for this rally and on the day of the event, and obviously the catastrophic failure that happened when this occurred. So it's too soon yet to conclusively say whether the shooter was acting alone or acting in concert with someone. In the coming weeks, this task force will continue our work interviewing and being briefed by the FBI, Secret Service, and others who were there that day to help shed light on the background of this young man and how he ended up taking this just terrible action that day.
This is a very troubling question to ask, but can you rule out the possibility at this point that any member of security or law enforcement may have deliberately created a situation in which the former president was exposed to danger?
I think it's important to say that there's no evidence now that anything like that happened, that there has not been any indication to us or any evidence to suggest that any of the members on law enforcement that day deliberately allowed anything to happen. What we do see and what we have heard is that there were very serious failures when it comes to communication and coordination. Secret Service has a zero-fail mission, and clearly this was a total failure of their mission of security that day. One thing that's great about this task force, though, that I will point out is that it's bipartisan. So the Speaker of the House and the Minority Leader got together to appoint task force members. So we have 7 Republicans and 6 Democrats, but we're very much aligned in wanting to ensure we get to the bottom of this and ensure it doesn't happen again. So we like to say that we're just 13 members of Congress working together toward that common goal.
You're going to have at least a preliminary report by the end of this year, or at least that's
Yes.
the expectation. At this point, do you have any concerns of whether this may have been just a one-off or rather a pattern of lapses that could be continuing to expose the former president and the vice president and the running mates to danger?
That is the most critical concern, is understanding how this could happen, because we have 2 presidential candidates who are out on the trail every day right now. So that's why the urgency. So since this task force was created, the very next week, we had members of Congress out visiting the site. This task force has been working round the clock since its inception, because there is that incredible urgency to the work that we're doing here to make sure that if there is any shortcoming at Secret Service with their process, with their plans for rallies and events that are happening now, that is put to a stop, because all of these protectees who are out there need to be kept safe.
There was obviously an unprotected line of sight at the warehouse. When you physically visited the site, though, we can see it from video. You've seen it in person from an investigative perspective. How many different lines of sight did you see that may not have been fully protected?
Well, it is really shocking how close this shooter was able to get to President Trump on that day. And we did walk the farm grounds. We actually went up on the roof where the shooter was on that day. And it is evident that he was able to get incredibly close with a clear line of sight. And there were other locations that were also outside of the security perimeter that could have been a danger. So we are asking questions about how that security perimeter was set up, why it was designated like it was, why there weren't more agents assigned that day, and also how the critical communication failure could have happened, so that when state and local law enforcement or families and citizens who were there attending the rally saw things that were suspicious or saw things they wanted to raise to the attention of Secret Service. Why didn't that happen immediately? And what kind of challenges were there that day?
And not only that, but you also have local law enforcement identifying a gunman on the roof some 30 seconds before the shots were fired. How can that even happen?
Absolutely. And one of the other key questions is, if we knew there was a suspicious person in the area that day, why was President Trump allowed to get on that stage? Because that created incredible danger for him and for all of the other rally goers who were there that day. And that's another part of this story that is so evident visiting Pennsylvania. This was a heartbreaking experience for this community. The families that came out that day just wanting to civically engage and were excited about attending a rally and were put in grave danger, in harm's way, and then also the loss of life and injury that day for private citizens. So it's something that we're all very committed to ensuring cannot happen again.
And you do have some extraordinarily important work to do. Representative Laurel Lee, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.